It was a warm and breezy late June evening in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Maplewood when 8-year-old Lily Reynolds vanished from her own front yard. In a place where everyone knew each other's names and no door was ever locked, her disappearance struck like lightning from a clear sky. How could a child simply disappear from under her parents' noses? Who could be capable of such a crime in a seemingly idyllic town? This is the story of trust, betrayal, and the chilling secrets hidden in plain sight. We will uncover what really happened to Lily, and how her neighbor's perfect facade fooled them all. Maplewood was one of those small-town enclaves where children played tag until dusk, neighbors hosted monthly block parties, and the local diner displayed everyone's birthdays on a chalkboard by the entrance. Lily's parents, Sarah and Michael Reynolds, had never once worried about their daughter's safety. Lily was an imaginative child who spent hours in the backyard sketching pictures of birds. She dreamed of becoming a veterinarian and had already adopted stray kittens from around the area. That night in June, Sarah had only turned away from the window for a few seconds, and when she looked back, Lily was gone. No trace left. Within the hour, Michael was frantically searching the neighborhood, calling Lily's name while Sarah dialed every friend and acquaintance they knew. The police were notified, and soon every neighbor had their porch lights on, scanning bushes and backyards with flashlights. Among those first to volunteer was a man named Richard Williams, a 42-year-old accountant who lived directly across the street. Known for his impeccable lawn, polite ways, and generosity, Richard was considered a pillar of the community. He offered to organize a search party, and no one questioned his eagerness to help. After all, Richard was always the nicest guy around. Sarah recalled Richard visiting them often, sometimes bringing fresh-baked cookies or leftover pastries from a local bakery. He was unmarried and lived alone, frequently joking that he was the fun uncle of the block, though he had no actual family nearby. Richard had helped the Reynolds paint their living room, fix squeaky doors, and he was the go-to handyman whenever small repairs were needed. No one suspected him of anything sinister. Why would they? In Maplewood, everyone trusted one another. Yet, behind Richard's soft smile was a darker side no one had ever glimpsed, and Lily's disappearance would soon expose it. The police investigation kicked into high gear the following morning. Officers combed through the Reynolds home, Lily's school records, and recent phone calls to see if there had been any suspicious activity. Local news stations broadcast her photo, urging everyone to keep their eyes open. Sarah and Michael made heartfelt pleas on television, tears in their eyes, begging for Lily's safe return. Even the FBI was consulted. Maplewood turned into a beehive of concerned neighbors, well-meaning volunteers, and news trucks parked along the streets. Through it all, Richard was front and center, coordinating search teams and comforting the distraught parents. Days turned into weeks with no sign of Lily. The police knocked on every door in Maplewood, interviewed visitors and delivery drivers, and set up checkpoints along the highways. With the story now national news, tips poured in from across the state. None led anywhere substantial. Sarah's mental health deteriorated rapidly. She refused to eat or sleep, haunted by nightmares of losing her daughter forever. Michael tried to remain composed, but his eyes constantly darted around the street, as though Lily might appear at any moment. Meanwhile, Richard continued his efforts, delivering food to the Reynolds and always offering unwavering support. As the weeks dragged on, an air of suspicion began to blanket Maplewood. People started locking their doors at night for the first time in decades. Children were kept indoors, no longer free to roam the tree-lined streets. Everyone had a theory, and the rumor mill churned relentlessly. Perhaps a traveling salesman was involved, or an ex-convict from the next town over. Somehow, Richard escaped these speculations entirely. Whenever doubts were raised about possible suspects, his name never came up. Why would it? He was the well-mannered neighbor with a calm, friendly face, always ready to lend a helping hand. Let's take a step back and look at Richard's past. Born in a modest household in rural Ohio, he was the youngest of 3 siblings. An introverted child, he found solace in books and puzzles, rarely joining his siblings in outdoor games. He moved to Maplewood after accepting an accounting position at a local firm. Neighbors described him as courteous, if somewhat reserved. He chatted about gardening, occasionally offered tax advice, and left no footprint of scandal or misconduct. On the surface, he seemed like a man who'd led a simple life, no skeletons in his closet, at least not visibly. But lurking beneath his helpful demeanor was a longing that had festered for years. Richard yearned for a family. He desperately wanted the closeness he had never truly experienced growing up. When he was in his early 20s, he dated a woman named Darlene, who ended the relationship after only a few months, citing his obsessive behavior. Since then, Richard had struggled to maintain meaningful relationships. Over time, his loneliness evolved into an unsettling compulsion. He wanted a child, someone who would love him unconditionally, someone he could mold and protect. Little did Lily know she was his chosen one. How could a man with no history of violence orchestrate such a meticulously hidden crime? That's the question investigators would eventually ask themselves. And how could an entire community, desperate to find a missing girl, overlook the one person who was with them every step of the way? This is the story of deception at its highest level. A man who didn't merely kidnap a child but tried to create an entirely new life, hidden behind normalcy. At this point, you might be wondering, where was Lily, and how did Richard manage to keep her under lock and key for so long? The truth is terrifyingly simple. Lily was just across the street, living in Richard's soundproof basement. The day she disappeared, Richard had noticed Sarah briefly stepping away. It took only seconds for him to lure Lily with the promise of a surprise gift, a kitten he claimed to have rescued. Once inside his home, Lily was led down to a furnished basement, complete with a small bed, toy shelf, and even a television. Terrified yet strangely comforted by Richard's familiarity, she complied. He manipulated her fear, insisting that her parents had agreed to let her stay with him for a while. For the first few days, Lily believed his story. Richard allowed her to watch cartoons and fed her pizza and ice cream. He presented himself as a kind caregiver. But gradually, he imposed rules. She couldn't speak too loudly, couldn't try to leave, and most importantly, she must never tell anyone that she was there. Whenever Lily asked to see her parents, Richard told her they were too busy or that they would come soon. He wholeheartedly orchestrated a completely twisted version of fatherhood, tucking her in at night and reading stories. In his mind, he had finally adopted Lily. Meanwhile, Richard maintained his outward persona flawlessly. He joined every search party, asked the police probing questions, and comforted Lily's parents with words of hope. Sarah later recalled how Richard would drop by their home, quietly patting her hand as he promised that Lily would be found soon. The police, for their part, had no reason to suspect him. He had no criminal record, and he never acted nervously during interviews. Richard was methodical, ensuring Lily remained hidden in a basement designed to mute any cries for help. His plan, it seemed, was utterly foolproof. Then came a very unexpected twist. A newly assigned detective named Carla Ramirez. Transferred from a big city precinct, Carla was known for her keen instincts and relentless pursuit of the truth. She noticed inconsistencies in the timeline of Lily's disappearance and the collective testimonies. Something about Richard's overly helpful demeanor struck her as deeply odd, though she had no evidence to back up her hunch. She decided to discreetly monitor his movements, checking his background for any red flags. But Richard's record was spotless. Still, Carla couldn't shake the feeling that the nicest man in Maplewood might be hiding something. In the basement, Lily's emotional state wavered between hope and despair. She missed her parents terribly, but whenever she cried, Richard would console her with gentle words, promising that Mommy and Daddy would arrive soon. There were times Lily almost believed him, especially when he brought new toys or let her watch her favorite cartoons. But doubts crept in. She wondered why her parents had never visited. Why hadn't she gone to school? Richard, sensing her growing unease, threatened that if she tried to run away, she'd never see her family again. Frightened, Lily complied, but her longing never subsided. Carla's instincts led her to review every piece of evidence with fresh eyes. She noticed that Richard's statements, while cooperative, were almost too polished. He recalled the exact time he joined the search, the specific route he took, and even minor details like what Lily was wearing days before she vanished. Carla also found it peculiar that Richard had no alibi beyond being home alone. Yet no one questioned it, assuming he was out searching like everyone else. If he was so involved, why didn't anyone see him during certain search windows? She meticulously marked these inconsistencies in her notebook. Still, suspicion alone wasn't enough to implicate Richard. Carla needed hard proof or a credible witness statement. She quietly interviewed neighbors, asking if they'd seen anything unusual about Richard's comings and goings. Most people praised him, insisting he was an outstanding neighbor. One elderly resident vaguely recalled hearing a child's voice near Richard's house late at night, but she dismissed it as a television show. Carla jotted this down. With no direct evidence, she couldn't obtain a warrant to search Richard's home. Time was slipping away, and Lily's trail was growing colder by the day. Desperation weighed on her shoulders. Meanwhile, Richard was starting to grow bolder in his twisted endeavor. He began to let Lily roam the basement a bit more freely, even allowing her upstairs when he was certain nobody would see. He had built a concealed door leading from the basement to the garage, enabling him to move Lily without attracting attention. On one afternoon, he took her to a nearby park, very carefully avoiding times when neighbors might recognize them. Lily, starved for sunlight, believed Richard's assurances that this was a temporary arrangement. But as the weeks slowly passed, she knew something was very deeply wrong. Carla's significant breakthrough came when she discovered an overlooked security camera near Maplewood's playground. Reviewing the footage, she noticed a brief clip of Richard walking hand in hand with a small girl whose face was partially obscured by a hood. The timestamp matched a period when Richard claimed to be at work. Though the footage wasn't crystal clear, it raised enough suspicion for Carla to confront him. She approached him casually one evening, asking routine questions about that day. Richard's calm responses belied no panic, yet Carla sensed a crack in his composure. She knew she was onto something. Inside Richard's basement, Lily overheard snippets of conversation upstairs. One day, she heard Carla's voice. Heart pounding, Lily considered shouting for help but remembered Richard's threats. Fear won out, and she stayed silent. Later, he scolded her for making any noise. The psychological grip he had on Lily was immense. He alternated between kindness and intimidation, forging a bond that trapped her emotionally. Lily was desperate, yet unsure if Carla could truly save her. She was just a stranger asking questions, and Lily had come to believe that only her parents could rescue her from this living nightmare. Carla built her case methodically. She compiled Richard's inconsistent timeline, the playground footage, and testimonies about his whereabouts. Yet it remained circumstantial. Determined, she sought a warrant to search Richard's house, but her request was initially denied by higher-ups who felt the evidence was too thin. Undeterred, Carla took a different approach. She convinced Sarah and Michael to allow a wiretap near their home, hoping Richard would say something incriminating. It was a long shot, but in her experience, perpetrators often grew comfortable and slipped up eventually. Little did she know that time was running out faster than anyone realized. Meanwhile, Richard sensed the walls closing in. He noticed Carla's increased interest in his activities, and he grew more paranoid. Afraid that Lily might be discovered, he considered moving her to another location, a remote cabin once owned by his late uncle. But transporting an 8-year-old girl without drawing suspicion was risky. He wrestled with the idea each night, torn between the life he built with Lily and the fear of getting caught. In his distorted mindset, she had become his daughter, the fulfillment of a lifelong dream. The thought of losing her to the authorities filled him with dread. How could a seemingly gentle neighbor be capable of such unspeakable acts? That question haunted Carla and everyone else in Maplewood who didn't yet suspect him. The truth is that evil can wear a smile as comfortably as kindness can. Richard's veneer of normalcy was an illusion, carefully orchestrated to mask his darkest desires. He believed he was giving Lily a better life, convincing himself that her parents didn't appreciate her the way he could. His fantasy grew stronger every day she remained in his grip. And so did the danger, for Lily and for anyone who might uncover it. Then, one fateful evening, Carla received a late-night phone call from Sarah. Through tears, Sarah recounted a bizarre conversation she'd had with Richard. He'd insinuated that Lily might be in a safer place than anyone realized. That sometimes families aren't who you think they are. Sarah had pressed him for clarity, but he backtracked, claiming he was talking about a television show. Alarmed, Carla seized on this conversation. Though not definitive proof, it indicated Richard possessed knowledge beyond the community's general speculation. Finally, Carla got approval for a search warrant, but it came with strict parameters. The search team arrived at Richard's home early the next morning. Nervous yet composed, Richard allowed them inside. He offered coffee, claiming he had nothing to hide. The team meticulously combed through the living room, bedrooms, and even the attic. Nothing. Carla grew anxious. She could feel the tension in the air. Then she noticed a discrepancy in the basement's layout versus the architect's blueprint. She insisted they check behind a large shelving unit. At first, Richard protested, saying it was just extra storage. But Carla's determination prevailed. Behind the shelf, they found a locked door, hidden from view. The door led to a well-furnished room. Heart pounding, Carla stepped inside. The space looked like a child's bedroom, complete with stuffed animals, children's books, and a small bed in the corner. But Lily was nowhere to be seen. Fear gripped everyone present. Where was she? Richard stood at the threshold, insisting he'd set up a playroom for visiting relatives. No one believed him. Searching further, Carla found a hidden crawlspace leading to the garage. It was there, under a makeshift tarp, that they discovered Lily. She was huddled in fear, clutching a worn teddy bear and trembling uncontrollably. No one saw it coming. The moment Lily emerged from the darkness, alive but deeply traumatized. The team rushed to her side, offering blankets and assurances. Richard was promptly arrested. Sarah and Michael, who had arrived in frantic haste, burst into tears at the sight of their daughter. Lily, sobbing, ran into her mother's arms, unable to articulate the relief, terror, and confusion swirling within her. Outside, the gathered neighbors watched in shock as the man they'd trusted was taken into custody. The entire community realized just how blind they'd been, how easily they'd been fooled by Richard's facade. At the police station, Richard maintained a disturbingly calm demeanor. He explained that he believed he was providing Lily with a stable environment, that he loved her more than her own parents ever could. The interrogation tapes would later reveal his delusional mindset, filled with a twisted logic in which he saw himself as a savior rather than a kidnapper. Sarah and Michael pressed charges for kidnapping, false imprisonment, and child endangerment. Lily received immediate medical and psychological evaluation. Though the physical scars were minimal, the emotional wounds were significant. She would need therapy to heal from the trauma. In the aftermath, Maplewood grappled with the horror that had lurked right in their midst. Parents questioned how they could have missed the signs. Neighbors pondered their blind trust in Richard. The police department implemented stricter protocols for missing person cases, and Detective Carla Ramirez was lauded as a hero for her perseverance. Lily spent the following months reacquainting herself with freedom. She still woke up in the middle of the night, sometimes calling for Richard instead of her parents. Old routines returned slowly, attending school, drawing birds in the backyard, and falling asleep without fear of locked doors. So how could a man like Richard go undetected for so long? Why did nobody suspect the neighbor who seemed so genuine and helpful? This case serves as a chilling reminder that criminals can hide behind the most ordinary of masks. The people of Maplewood learned a hard lesson. Vigilance matters, even in safe neighborhoods. Today, Lily is on the path to recovery, though nightmares of that basement sometimes resurface. Sarah and Michael hold her a bit tighter now, grateful for every moment. And as for Richard, he will spend his years behind bars, another face of evil unmasked.